Chapter 181, Founded metal chains entangled all four of the great druid Caspian's limbs in a cube-shaped cage around which lightning was crackling and sparking off of. An icy mist was hovering about the chains, freezing the man stiff to the bone and making even his breathing obviously labored. When Han Shao and Emily found Caspian in this room, they rushed towards the druid shocked. Emily only took one glance before diagnosing quietly. There are both electric and water element magical boundaries at work here. In addition to this, the cage is restricting his power. I need some time to disassemble the spells. Glancing quickly at the ice beginning to form on tips of the druid's hair, Han Shao said, "I'm confident that my weapon is sharp enough to penetrate the cage directly." Emily reached out a hand to stop Han Shao, shaking her head sternly and explaining, "This is a magic boundary made of both electric and water elements that has been set up quite intricately. If you don't know the proper technique and attempt to break through the cage with brute force alone, you might kill him through electrocution or hypothermia." Han Shao was far from being Emily's equal in the knowledge of magic in general, since necromancy magic differed from the other paths of magic. After hearing her explanation, he didn't continue, pressing his own thoughts. "All right, you work on releasing him from the boundary and I'll look for evidence against Bob Asher." With that said, he left Emily and began to investigate their surroundings. Crowded with numerous shelves of various sizes holding many strange fascinating items, the room did not seem very spacious. There were many glistening badges marked with certain symbols describing its meaning on one of the shelves. These were the awards which Bob Asher had received through his many years of service, which helped him rise to the position of Chief of the Griffin Legion, becoming the items that he could flaunt for the rest of his life. There was another shelf that housed a few cavalry helmets and weapons. Some were shiny while others were patently damaged. There was a small slip of paper under every piece that detailed which battle the helmet or weapon had been used in. The rest of the shelves of assorted sizes held either old books or obviously exorbitant swords and spears, not the pearls, jewels and jade that Han Shao expected. Emily had been working on dismantling the druid's confinement in the distance when she happened to see Han Shao bored by the items on the shelves, his mind even wandering a little. She couldn't help but chide a man such as Bob Asher wouldn't place run-of-the-mill jewels in his secret chamber, so rid yourself thieving thoughts. Wealth hasn't been his goal for a long time. The things here represent his glory and memories, nothing that gold can compare to. With that reminder, Han Shao sighed dejectedly. "Here I thought I would find a ton of gold and wealth in his secret chamber. I was even planning to reward Gilbert after this mission, but I suppose I was ignorant and ill-informed." "Go look through the other things." Emily rolled her eyes and urged Han Shao, "We need enough evidence to pin him for good." Taking a deep breath to help himself focus, Han Shao quickly walked around the shelves searching for any hidden items, but after going around once and looking through every single shelf, he still didn't find anything of value. "Seems like we're out of luck." Han Shao walked back to Emily with his palms open and said with some resignation, "Just a second." Emily was at a crucial part of her work. A shadowy cloud of magic pulsed between her hands and she pressed it firmly against the cage. Snap, crackle. The cage began to sizzle and fizz. Once Emily's magic cloud came into contact with it and vanished in an instant. Caspian's trembling eased as well. "All right, now that the magic boundary has been broken, you can rescue him with your weapon." Emily breathed out a light sigh and turned around with a graceful smile before sashaying towards the shelves. "Leave finding evidence against Bob Asher to me. My experience in the Dark Mantle has made me an expert at this kind of work." "Thank you." The druid shakingly expressed his gratitude towards Han Shao as he slowly regained his body heat after the magic boundary was dissolved. Hey, you're just lucky that we came across you." Chuckling, Han Shao took Demon Slayer Edge into his hand, into which he directed his magical yuan and swung it in the air. With a loud crack, a few obsidian metal bars snapped under the Demon Slayer Edge's swing. Han Shao reached out and forcefully bent the bars to the side, allowing the druid to step out. Upon leaving his confinement, Caspian stretched his body and took in a few deep breaths before asking Han Shao, "Where's Angelica? Is she in danger?" "Rest assured, we left her in the care of the Battlefire mercenary band before we left. I don't think she will run into any trouble, but she's very worried about you." After answering, Han Shao looked at Emily, not asking why Caspian was imprisoned there in the first place. Meanwhile, Emily took out a particular magic item and played with it in her hands until she forced open a hidden compartment in the corner. After rummaging through it, she fished out a small book. "Aha, I found it." Hidden compartments are common in secret chambers but are concealed with space magic that an average person can almost never discover. Only a space Grand Magus is able to sense these magical ripples and disable the disguise, but the Dark Mantle does this kind of stuff so often that we've come up with a specialized magical tool. With it I could detect even the slightest magical activity in this room and obtain everything we need, Emily proudly explained with the book now in hand. So does that mean our mission is complete? Han Shao asked with a grin after a pause. Nodding rather happily, Emily replied, that's right, as long as we can leave Valen City. Bob Asher is a dead man. It was then that they heard a series of hurried knocks coming from above. Expressions tensing, Han Shao and Emily shared a quick look before the former finally spoke. That was Gilbert's signal. It means that somebody has noticed our existence and is heading here. Let's go back up and depart from this place. With that said, Emily ascended the way they had come. The great druid had yet to recover from his recent escape from the cage. He was still pale in the face and his steps were stiff and awkward. Nimbly maneuvering himself to flank Caspian, Han Shao threw the druid onto his back and dashed out behind Emily, returning to Bob Asher's bedroom. Just as they arrived they heard the sounds of battle from outside the door. Emily shared a quick worried look with Han Shao before she reached out for the bed. Reverting the bed to its original form, the two of them raced out the door. On the other side, Gilbert was holding off an attack from several soldiers of the Griffin Legion with a spear in hand. Another squad of Griffin Legion troops was drawing near. Some were equipped with bows and arrows and had positioned themselves appropriately to shoot down Gilbert. You're finally out, honored master. I'm afraid I can't hold them off for much longer. Spotting Han Shao, Gilbert jumped back after fending off a strike with his spear and shouted to his master. All three of them, Han Shao, Emily and Gilbert, had their faces and identities concealed unmistakably, the appearance of no good doers. Even the great druid had been disguised with black mask before Han Shao carried him out. The party appeared more like a group of sneaky bandits. Let's get out of here, Han Shao exclaimed as the flow of Griffin Legion soldiers converged on them. He sprinted out through an opening before the enemies could seal them in. The bowmen and crossbowmen had finished loading their weapons by then. If Han Shao and Emily were to take flight, they would become clear targets without any cover, and thus, they were forced to take shelter behind the artificial mountain and plants in the villa. Without wasting words or even a nod, Gilbert charged behind Han Shao. Flames had completely swamped the manor and screams now filled the air. Belinda and Johnny had stormed through a wall using the three-eyed golem and were running as if their lives depended on it. Johnny even appeared to be wounded as an arrow stuck out from his butt and his chest was dripping with blood. This way, spotting Han Shao's party, Belinda rather loyally waved and signaled for them to join up with her. However, Han Shao ignored her and dashed for the opposite wall. He yelled back, "Are you kidding? I don't want to die fighting all those soldiers on your tail, thank you very much." Chapter 182 A fierce battle. Everything was incredibly chaotic within the manor as fires licked at all the houses. Groups of black-robed people scurried hither and thither amidst waves of panic as Griffin Legion soldiers chased them everywhere, completely throwing the manor into wild disarray. "Wait for us!" Two shapely black figures suddenly rushed out as Han Shao, Emily and Gilbert were running in another direction. Han Shao knew this should be Phoebe as soon as he heard the voice. It went without saying that the other person was Candace. The two of them had set fire to everything when the mission had just begun. As a fire mage swordsman, such matters came naturally to Candace. She had engulfed the entire place in a sea of flames after a short while. There were a few Griffin Legion soldiers behind them and another awe-inspiring elder wielding a longsword that flared with silver fighting aura. The man quickly dashed over and his imposing presence made it hard for one to look directly at him. He lightly waved the great sword in his hand and thoroughly pulverized all trees, shrubbery and rocks in the silver fighting aura's path. Even the ground split open with various cracks demonstrating the frightening ferocity of the fighting aura. "He's Clark's master, Great Sword Master Gabriel. We need to get out of here." Candace grew extremely worried as she called out and fled toward Han Shao with an even faster speed. Gabriel was extremely swift as he'd flung the Griffin Legion soldiers with him far behind. As a Great Sword Master, Gabriel possessed extreme strength. Han Shao needed to take one glance set him to know that there was no one beside him who could fight Gabriel alone. As they witnessed Gabriel picking up speed about to overtake Phoebe and Candace, Han Shao-Oh's heart clenched as he looked at Gabriel, suddenly remembering the might of Gilbert's transformation, and immediately shouted, "Damn it, hurry up and transform!" Han Shao concentrated like he never had before, and at the same time compelled the Demon Slayer Edge to fly wildly at Great Sword Master Gabriel. Infusing the Demon Slayer Edge with magical yuan, a thick magical aura flared out from it with a bizarre sense of fire and frost interspersed within it. The Demon Slayer Edge howled and slashed through the air, appearing directly in front of Great Sword Master Gabriel, stabbing directly towards him. That odd sense of heat brought an exceedingly dangerous presence and rather surprised Gabriel. Snorting coldly, Gabriel waved the longsword in his hand and suddenly gave birth to a silver firework in the distance as resplendent as the shattered stars. Han Shao suddenly felt an enormous force explode out of the glorious silver sparkles and attempt to firmly hold the Demon Slayer Edge in place. A burst of tremendous energy surged violently into the Demon Slayer Edge. Gabriel's silver fighting aura was incredibly overbearing, rumbling on the surface of the Demon Slayer Edge as though it wished to ravage everything. The enveloping silver light caused the Demon Slayer light to emit humming noises. This tyrannical power wound its way around the Demon Slayer Edge in an instant, chaotically mixing with the fire and frost energy that Han Shao had created inside the blade with his magic. The magical energy from the mystical glacial spell fire that had coalesced in the blade rapidly disappeared. Muttering a quick curse, Han Shao knew that his magical training had been too brief. No matter how fantastical his magic was, with such a short amount of time spent on training, he was still unable to measure up to Gabriel's decades spent coalescing his fighting aura. In the moment they'd connected, the magical yuan within the Demon Slayer Edge completely dissipated, and the result a foregone conclusion. However, because of the Demon Slayer Edge's obstruction, it slowed down Gabriel's pursuit of Phoebe and Candace. Han Shao felt that things weren't right when he couldn't resummon the Demon Slayer Edge back to his hand. He thought quickly as his heart clenched. Han Shao swiftly sang out a magic spell as two bone spears suddenly flew towards Gabriel. In the instant that Han Shao made his move, Emily also released a dark magic spell. At the same time, Han Shao used his entire strength to quickly circulate the magical yuan within the Demon Slayer Edge and used Gabriel's distraction in fending off their magical attacks to wrest the Demon Slayer Edge away from the ball of silver light. Because he'd spent too much energy and the speed of the circulating magical yuan was beyond Han Shao's limits, Han Shao couldn't help but spit out a mouthful of blood, having already been injured. "You're injured, let me down, I think I've recovered." Caspian on Han Shao's back could clearly feel Han Shao's body tremble violently and immediately spoke when he saw Han Shao spit out a mouthful of blood. Gabriel had already destroyed Han Shao and Emily's magics in this short amount of time, and his cold gray eyes once again swept toward Han Shao and Emily. His gaze on Han Shao in particular was infused with some surprise, as he seemed to be incredibly curious about Han Shao's magical yuan and the Demon Slayer Edge. "Bam!" sounded out as Han Shao turned his head to see that Gilbert had finally transformed back into an enormous black dragon. His body was covered with black scales and he'd already crushed the wall in front of Han Shao and the others. Everyone on his back. Han Shao was delighted to see Gilbert reveal the body of a black dragon and roared out loudly, throwing Caspian over to Gilbert as well. He used a certain amount of force when he did so that when Caspian arrived where Gilbert was, the momentum around his body would lessen and it wouldn't cause too much harm to the druid. Apart from Emily knowing Gilbert's identity in advance, Gilbert's sudden transformation shocked everyone senseless. They stared open-mouthed at the enormous Gilbert and couldn't really react for a while. "All Griffin Legion soldiers gather here. Archers and spear throwers, prepare your arrows, spears and crossbows. You can be dragon slayers today." Gabriel's loud call suddenly rang out and spread throughout the manor. "Why aren't you getting on yet?" Han Shao couldn't help but roar furiously when he saw that Candace and Phoebe were still dithering about on the ground in shock. Dark dragons were also labeled as the most evil and greedy amongst the dragons. They liked to live in the gloomy underworld and were lustful, shameless and greedy. They were practically the materialization of evil on the earth. That such a dark dragon had suddenly appeared in front of them, it was no wonder that Phoebe and Candace didn't know how to react. But when Han Shao urged them on a second time, the two girls finally recognized the dark dragon's relationship with Han Shao and looked askance at him leaping up to land on Gilbert's back. When he saw that Emily, Phoebe and Caspian had all leapt until Gilbert's back, Han Shao relaxed and activated the art to also fly towards Gilbert. Leave immediately, but don't take to the skies or you'll become a flying target. Honored master, you must block the spears and arrows that fly my way. Gilbert had a mouthful of sharp teeth now and his dragon's breath was filled with a piercing odd smell. His voice also appeared to have an additional layer of dignity in it. I know all is a mess here anyways. Just destroy anything that gets in your way. Don't pay heed to anything else as long as we can get out of here. Han Shao didn't put any restrictions on Gilbert now as long as they could make it out of this sticky situation alive. When Caspian heard Han Shao's orders, he seemed to want to protest, but when he thought of how Han Shao had helped him numerous times already and that he was trying to get everyone out alive, he said nothing in the end after moving his lips a few times. Wahahaha, then alright, I'll do as I see fit. Gilbert spoke excitedly with his dignified voice. That heavily fanged mouth suddenly yawned open and sprayed a gout of acidic poison into the distance. Dragon breath accompanied this spray and the archers who had just set up their formation hastily retreated. Those who didn't back up in time were reduced to melting flesh after their bodies had came into contact with the acid. Death was the only way out for them. After this breath went out, scores of Griffin Legion soldiers appeared suddenly. They wielded silver spears and gleaming silver armor as they flew in on the backs of griffins. The person in front was fierce and stocky. He looked middle-aged as the silver fighting aura from the spear in his hand shot out 2 to 3 meters tall, making that silver spear carved with mystical patterns appearing even longer. Hurry and go, Bob Asher has arrived. It looks like the Calamity Church has failed indeed. When he saw that the dark dragon still wanted to rampage around, Han Shao quickly kicked him in the side and hastily gave this order. Chapter 183. The swift and fierce Silver Spear 10 Griffin Legion soldiers and Bob Asher, as well as the Swordmaster Gabriel, little dark dragon Gilbert would be courting death if he attempted to face this enormous amount of strength head-on. Beneath Han Shao's urging, Gilbert realized the magnitude of the situation they were in and didn't waste time with cheeky remarks. He charged over from the now obliterated wall while the archers and spear throwers on Gabriel's side found their footing once more in a newly formed formation. They suddenly shot out in unison and filled the blotted out the skies with arrows and spears targeting Gilbert. Han Shao and the others had long since made preparations. Emily shot out a dark magical spell and formed a gray semicircle protective barrier in the air. Han Shao also chanted the incantation for dark mist covering the entire area in darkness. Candace, Phoebe and Caspian also used a variety of methods to smash the arrows and spears that came their way. Han Shao had already been injured when he had crossed blades with Gabriel earlier. It was a good thing that he could call upon his necromancy magic without his magical yuan. When Han Shao chanted out a magical spell, several zombie and hate warriors suddenly appeared on the ground, in addition to dozens of skeletal warriors forming a blockade in the gap in the wall that had been made by Gilbert. The summoned dark creatures played the roles of meat shields, filling up the gap so that the attacks fell only on them. Add to this Emily's magic shield and Han Shao's dark mist, as well as Phoebe and Candace's efforts, Gilbert didn't suffer any injuries in the end. The dark creatures that Han Shao had summoned were shot full of arrows and spears, and he once again began chanting, but this time it was the corpse explosion spell that he'd just mastered when the soldiers of the Griffin Legion drew near, making 2 hate warriors explode, sending flesh and blood flying through the sky. The 10 soldiers were caught off guard and were all sent crashing backwards. Take to the sky and get us out of here, Han Shao yelled out as he made use of this chance in which the dark creatures were blocking all the arrows and spears. Gilbert didn't hesitate when he heard Han Shao's order and swung his enormous body around, crushing 2 houses by his side. Boulders hurtled through the air as trees snapped. Gilbert roared as his body, previously hovering close to the ground, suddenly shot towards the dark sky. Halt right there! Bob Asher suddenly shot over magically at this moment, the silver spear in his hand suddenly shooting out like a silver comet. A splendid tail followed behind it as it aimed for Gilbert. As a Skyrider, Bob Asher had weathered many battles over the years and had seen all sorts of situations. Not only was he himself quite fierce, but his breadth of battle experience experience was even more rich. He understood that it would be difficult to catch up to Gilbert with the Griffin's speed, so the only way was to injure Gilbert first. Otherwise, even though he had a large amount of troops following close behind him, it would be impossible to keep Han Shao-Oh's group behind. Bob Asher's abundant fighting aura was concentrated into the spear as it drew a magnificent, almost piercing arc in the dark night sky. It embodied a severe presence within it, giving Han Shao and the others immense pressure. The spear flew towards them as if hunting prey, whistling through the night and seeming to be making use of the wind as well. Han Shao hastily chanted another bone spear spell, and 2 bone spears suddenly materialized in front of the silver spear according to Han Shao's will. They broke apart as soon as they touched the spear, and the spear continued unabated on its path. As Han Shao was reeling in shock, Emily chanted out a dark magic spell as a Grim Reaper's blade once again formed in the night sky. As the magic staff in Emily's hands drew an arc downwards, the Grim Reaper's blade shot swiftly towards the oncoming silver spear. Another exploding sound rang out as Emily suddenly stumbled on Gilbert's back. She couldn't help but take a few steps backwards as the blade formed out of her mental strength dissipated in the blink of an eye. However, because of her attack, the fighting aura coalesced on the tip of the silver spear had decreased noticeably. Whether it was the flare of its silver light or its speed, both had been suddenly decreased. Although Han Shao's heart went out to Emily at this time, he didn't have the time to comfort her. He stared unblinkingly at the spear, prepared to summon the Demon Slayer Edge and meet it in combat. 2 crossbow bolts suddenly flew out from Phoebe and Candace's hands. Candace's bolt missed, but Phoebe's bolt solidly smashed into the slowing silver spar. Because of this bolt, the spear's speed decreased once more. Gilbert had increased his speed at this time and was making for the horizon. He increased the gap between the group and Bob Asher's Griffin and continued to pull ahead. "Convey my orders. The entire city is under martial law. Only entrance is allowed, exit is not. All transportation matrices traveling to other cities are to be closed. No one can activate them without my order. All trespassers will be killed without exception." Bob Asher's fierce yell could be heard in the distance, with even Han Shao and the others hearing him clearly. "Are you all right?" Han Shao relaxed when he saw that they were temporarily out of danger, but his expression tightened as he hurriedly rushed to Emily's side and held her up. Emily took off her mask and displayed a face drained of color, but when she saw that Han Shao was asking after her so urgently, sweetness flooded her heart as she gave a weak laugh. "No worries, this is what happens after I exhaust my magic. Don't worry about me. How are you?" "I'll be fine after a few days of rest as well." Han Shao also comforted Emily with a smile. Phoebe was now wearing a stiff expression when she saw how intimate Han Shao and Emily were, but Emily was wounded and had gotten her injuries just now from protecting them all. She wasn't in a position to say anything about Han Shao's concern for her. Coughing lightly, she braved the chilly wind to walk up to Han Shao, worry also appearing on her stunning face. She reached out a slender jade hand to wipe the blood from Emily's lips, admonishing her, "You spit out blood, so how can you say that you're all right?" Exclamation mark. Phoebe's light cough and her motions immediately made Emily realize something. She pushed away Han Shao's support with a nonchalant smile and maintained a distance of 2 arm lengths from him, only saying, "Then what do we do now? I'm beginning to worry about the safety of the others now that Valen City is on lockdown." Han Shao's face darkened as she looked at Emily. Nodding, Emily said, "That's right, he was incredibly enraged just now and won't be easily pacified. Valen City has never closed its transportation matrices to other cities before. In doing so, he's cut off all chances of communication with the outside world. Whether it was the Empire or news from any other places, Valen City will be unable to receive any of it. Bob Asher must have hardened his heart and won't give up that easily since he's taken this step." The target I'd come to fight this time was Water Magus Howard by Bob Asher's side. "I had originally been confident of handling him, but he found someone to help him who doesn't play by the rules to capture me. He wanted something from our druid order after he captured me, but I didn't give it to him even when threatened with death. Before you came tonight, he said he was going to capture little Angelica to threaten me with, so I'm concerned for her safety." Caspian finally came clean with everything at this time. "Honored Master, where are we flying to? If you don't make a decision soon, we'll be leaving Valen City." Gilbert's voice suddenly rang out in the frosty winter air. Valen City was a mess at the moment, and so the best and wisest course of action was to leave. However, If they left now, those still in Valen City would likely be in great danger. Hesitation showed on Han Shao-Oh's face as he looked uncertainly at those assembled in front of him. My cousin is very good to me and I cannot leave him in danger. Phoebe resolutely expressed her stance when she saw Han Shao look at her. I can't give up on my battle comrades. Candace also spoke up. When Han Shao looked at Emily, Emily smiled charmingly. I'll go with whatever you decide. Gilbert returned to the hotel. Han Shao stomped down on the back of the dark dragon after thinking for a while. Chapter 184. An incredible memory. Having finally increased the distance between himself and Bob Asher and seeing that he was about to clear the danger zone, Gilbert complained when he heard Han Shao's instructions telling him to turn back. Honored master, even the mighty Gilbert cannot take on an entire Griffin Legion. We'll surely be discovered if we go back to the city like this. Shut up and fly back to the hotel. We need to pick up whoever we need to pick up. Han Shao snorted lightly as he spoke to Gilbert. In his dark dragon form there wasn't much space on his back for people to stand on. Han Shao wouldn't be able to take everyone away in one go, so he started to contemplate what to do. Thoughts racing furiously, Han Shao's sharp eyes saw Griffin Legion soldiers patrolling the skies as Gilbert was returning from the outskirts of Valen City. Gilbert was such a large target that it was impossible to surreptitiously sneak back into the hotel. Han Shao thought silently for a moment before suddenly saying, Gilbert, land immediately since the Griffin Legion has yet to spot us. We'll be returning to the hotel by foot. Under Han Shao's commands, Gilbert didn't say anything pointless and traveled stealthily at a low altitude, with everyone getting off his back in succession shortly after. When everyone had gotten off, Gilbert's huge body gradually shrunk, entombed in a dark radiance before once again transforming back into that dance-skinned handsome young man. When we were within Asher's manor just now, we had masks on. Now that we have returned under our true appearances, it's likely that they won't be able to recognize us. Han Shao glanced over at Emily as he spoke to her. Right, however, if a group of strangers suddenly appears at the same time and are somehow discovered by the Griffin Legion's people, we will definitely raise suspicions. I think we should split up, and by doing that other people won't think that we acted together. Emily looked at their group as she spoke. Alright then, let's do this. Everyone should be familiar with the way back. We'll split into two groups, and if there's danger within the hotel, we'll meet up at the block behind it. Han Shao nodded, agreeing with Emily's plan. Once Han Shao had spoken, Phoebe immediately moved matter-of-factly to Han Shao's side. As a magical pet, Gilbert naturally couldn't be separated from his master either. With the situation developing like this, Emily quickly looked at everyone and spoke again. Since things are like this, I'll be with Miss Candace and Elder Caspian. Elder Caspian has entered the city before, so we need you to use magic to adjust his features. Otherwise it will be extremely easy to recognize him, Han Shao warned. He then turned towards Phoebe and Gilbert, saying, let's go. Currently Valen City was even more chaotic than during the day that Clark had been assassinated. The chief of the Griffin Legion used the invasion and assassinations of the KC Empire as an excuse to seal off the entire city. The Griffin Legion's men whistled through the skies and immediately carried out a severe interrogation as soon as any stranger appeared. Under Han Shao's sensitive eyes and ears, his group of three focused on taking small winding paths. They scuttled under the shadow of the eaves, avoiding many troops from the Griffin Legion along the way. Regardless of whether it was Gilbert or Phoebe, they were both extraordinary characters. Since Han Shao's brain had developed, his powerful ability to recall things was fully deployed during this return trip. There were all types of complicated small passages that existed in Valen City, and it seemed as if there was a map imprinted into Han Shao's heart. As Han Shao made his way back, he moved erratically in all directions. In the end, even Phoebe began to feel as if they were getting farther and farther away from the hotel. If it wasn't for her knowing how mysterious Han Shao was, she definitely would have questioned whether or not Han Shao knew where he was going. After going through many small roads and traveling through a few curved routes, the back door of the hotel suddenly appeared before their eyes. Han Shao's had actually managed to completely avoid the airborne Griffin Legion and soldiers on the ground. By using a few smaller, more complicated roads, the three people actually didn't encounter any danger as they appeared at the hotel doors. "This is too amazing," Phoebe couldn't help but exclaim when she saw Elaine's hotel lights dancing in her eyes as she complimented Han Sha-oh. "Honored master, I'm super dizzy. How were you able to memorize such complicated roads?" Gilbert was also looking at Han Sha-oh with incredulity. Pointing at his head, Han Sha-oh chuckled. "I'm just that good." It was like he'd said nothing with that statement, but even if he'd explained a bit about his brain being developed, the two of them most likely wouldn't have understood regardless, so he didn't bother. Han Sha-oh took a deep breath after speaking and concentrated his gaze on the hotel. His eyes sparkled with dark gleams and his sensitive ears also turned towards the hotel. Contrary to his expectations, there wasn't anything out of the ordinary in the hotel. Han Sha-oh heard that everything was normal inside. There were no panicked sounds of fighting, nor was there any sounds of interrogation from the soldiers of the Griffin Legion. "You and Gilbert head over first. I'll go find Lawrence and tell him to leave the city immediately." Han Sha-oh spoke to Phoebe beside him. Phoebe's stunning face turned to look at him as she reached for his hand. She grasped his broad coarse hands tightly and said softly, "Be careful." "Don't worry, nothing's going to happen to me," Han Sha-oh said with a smile and turned to Gilbert. "Protect her well if anything happens." Han Sha-oh was like a shadow in the dark night. After he spoke, he melted into the darkness and vanished without a trace. On his way to Lawrence's place, Han Sha-oh heard a bizarre sound. He quickened his steps and landed on a tree branch. Han Sha-oh saw a disguised Lawrence Flecky and the two swordsmen he'd seen before making for the direction of the hotel with Belinda and Johnny from the Calamity Church. Coughing lightly, Han Sha-oh called out softly from the tree, "Lawrence!" The group below was greatly frightened by Han Sha-oh's cough. They all grasped their weapons tightly and swiveled to look up into the tree, almost sending out attacks as they turned. "Brian, what are you doing here? Shouldn't you have left the city long ago? We saw you take the Dark Dragon out of the manor and leave Asher behind." Lawrence spoke with confusion. "We came back again. Cut the blather and gather at the hotel. We are going to be leaving immediately. You can't stay in Valen City for a second longer." Han Sha-oh had no time to explain anything and responded carelessly, landing on the ground and convening with Lawrence and the others. When he drew near, Han Sha-oh discovered that Johnny had not only taken a hit to his buttocks, but there was a large patch of blood on his chest and it looked like he was injured quite severely. Although Belinda still had her veil on, her gaze wasn't as sharp as before. She looked a bit weak and had also likely been wounded. Lawrence and the others had only been involved in logistics and cleanup in this operation. They hadn't taken part in the actual battle, and so they were in relatively good spirits with no one being injured. What Han Sha-oh didn't understand was why he was with Belinda. Han Sha-oh hadn't introduced the two to each other, and so they shouldn't know each other. Hesitating, Han Sha-oh couldn't keep back the questions in his heart. He looked at Lawrence and then at Belinda. "How do the two of you know each other?" "Oh, we discovered that our two groups were going the same way when we were retreating earlier and ended up walking together." Lawrence glanced non-committally at Han Sha-oh and explained faintly. Belinda also nodded. "It's because of Mr. Lawrence's aid and that such a large number of his men went after you that we were able to make it out." "So that's the case." Han Sha-oh still felt that things weren't this simple, but since Belinda and Lawrence had the same story, he wasn't able to get anything else out of them either. Just as Han Sha-oh and Lawrence were almost at the hotel, Han Sha-oh could hear a group of Griffin Legion soldiers interrogating Elaine inside. He could hear her hearty laughter from a distance away, seemingly to not have a care in the world. However, his superior vision saw that as this troop was talking to Elaine, another soldier seemed to have received some instructions and surreptitiously left the hotel, walking swiftly towards the street and waving his hand up at the two Griffin Legion soldiers hovering in the sky. "Damn it, we must have been made." Although he didn't know why, Han Sha-oh knew that Elaine's hotel was no longer safe. He called out softly and didn't bother concealing his tracks anymore, making for the hotel like a streak of lightning. Chapter 185, The Great Escape. "Has there really not been any suspicious characters nearby lately?" a Griffin Legion officer asked Elaine. "Honored sir, our hotel has always had good ratings in Valen City and have always cooperated with the askers. We would have immediately reported to you had we discovered anyone suspicious." The chubby Elaine was still merry and promised with a smile that nothing was wrong with the hotel. "I feel that nothing would be wrong with your hotel anyways." The officer's expression was calm as he spoke gravely. A severe whistle sounded shouted at this moment as a streak of faint red cut through the dark sky, making straight for the officer. The officer, who's been putting on a show and talking to Elaine, had long since been on his guard. He wouldn't have sent his men out for help otherwise. He pulled out the sword by his side with an audible clang as soon as the whistle had sounded. Dark green fighting aura suddenly flared across it as it immediately flew out towards the descending red light. Ding! The sounds of weapons clashing into each other rang out. The demon slayer edge bit viciously into the officer's blade and extinguished his fighting aura, causing a nick in the officer's blade. A figure flashed at the same time as a hard fist pummeled towards the officer. The officer started in shock and he lifted his left hand, blocking his chest and attempting to stop Han Shao-Oh's punch. It had seemed to be an ordinary punch, but suddenly flared up with purple spell fire when it reached the officer's chest. A bitingly cold presence suddenly rushed to the front and it surged into his body when Han Shao-Oh's fist landed on his chest. The officer felt like he'd fallen into an icy cavern in a single instant. Frost immediately formed on his hair and eyebrows, and ice pierced through his body as well. He didn't even have the strength to lift his hands. Han Shao retraced his tightly clenched fist and snatched the demon slayer edge out of the air. He turned his head to yell at Elaine, "This place has been compromised. Tell everyone to leave the hotel immediately." Elaine quickly sized up the situation after recovering from her shock. The cries of the griffins were sounding out from the air at this time. This meant that Han Shao-Oh's judgment had been without error and that the soldiers circling in the sky were already closing in. However, Madame Emily has yet to return. Elaine was about to leave when she suddenly recalled that Emily was the true leader of this mission and couldn't help but speak up at this moment. "You don't need to worry about this, she will return soon." Han Shao grasped the demon slayer edge and charged into the soldiers, quickly responding to Elaine. Elaine had no other reservations after Han Shao's words, and she nodded as she turned. She yelled out as Angelica, members of the Battlefire mercenary band as well as Phoebe and Gilbert all emerged from the hotel. When they came outside, they joined in the fray without another word from Han Shao, killing all the Griffin Legion soldiers. "Go. Leave through the back." Although these soldiers were dead, this location had already been compromised. Along with the soldiers' previous report, this place would quickly become a prime target. The two hovering soldiers high up in the air had also discovered the abnormalities over here. The group of people didn't pack anything under Han Shao's orders and had just fled the hotel, running towards the back. Although Elaine didn't possess any fighting aura, she was quite quick on her feet and didn't become a burden. A loud outcry of yells suddenly sounded from the distance. Han Shao ran and jumped up, landing on a nearby roof. He looked into the distance and noticed that Emily, Candace and Caspian were fighting their way over here. A dozen cavalry members were behind them, riding armored battle steeds and wielding sharp spears. They pursued Emily fiercely, seeming to have discovered their identities. "Hurry, come this way." Han Shao suddenly called out loudly, his voice making it over to Emily's location like a sharp weapon. Lawrence's group also bumped into Phoebe and Candace at this time, making all those who had participated in the Bob Asher operation gather in one place. "Form up, let's make it out of here before the entire Griffin Legion arrives." Standing on top of the roof, Han Shao had become the leader of this mission as he called out sternly, "Still the horses." Emily suddenly hovered in midair on her way over as she slowly chanted a dark magic spell. The dozen fiercely charging knights suddenly floundered into a dark vortex along the way. The battle steeds' lightning fast speed suddenly became incredibly slow and their hooves made no sounds on the ground. The trees and the surroundings suddenly became alive as their branches danced like snakes, entangling the slowing horses, forcing them to stop where they stood. Caspian's old tree branch of a magic staff rested on a nearby tree. He concentrated and released the magic of the druidic order, restraining all 12 horses and confining even the legs of the knights on the horses. "Hurry up!" Caspian also suddenly roared out. "Grandpa, are you all right?" Angelica broke down into tears of joy when she saw her grandfather appear from the vantage point of being protected by the Battlefire mercenary band members. "Take the horses, come on." Han Shao had already charged out in the air and turned his head to yell back. Lawrence waved his hand and didn't bother speaking to Phoebe. Those beside him, including Belinda and Johnny of the Calamity Church and even Phoebe and Candace, dashed out and made for the dozen trussed-up horses and knights. Han Shao had Caspian Swordmaster Phoebe, Magus level Emily, Thunder Mage Swordsman Johnny, as well as Fire Mage Swordsman Candace, and finally Lawrence by his side. With such a group of experts coming together to take care pair of the ordinary knights tied up on the backs of their horses, it was easily a slaughter. Everyone displayed their abilities in the span of a few breaths and killed the 12 ordinary knights in a few seconds. They threw the bodies down and claimed the horses. Hurry and get out of here. We escaped this way because there's more than 100 similar cavalry behind us. Emily tugged on the reins and shouted. Just as her words sounded, the cries from the griffins in the air became more and more numerous. Han Shao lifted his head and suddenly discovered a few black dots converging on their location. His sensitive ears could hear random hoofbeats. It seemed that they would be surrounded before long. Come with me, we'll make it out soon. Han Shao yanked on the reins and turned the horse around, charging in the direction that Emily and the others had just come from. You're crazy. There's more than 100 knights back there. Emily was immediately shocked by Han Shao's about-face and called out in surprise. He turned back and looked at Emily with a wry smile. I think that's the only path available to us that will get us to the city walls as soon as possible. If we don't leave immediately, there will be countless troubles that follow behind us, so we must take that risk. Han Shao didn't hesitate after speaking and charged off on the back of his steed, shooting for the location where the hoofbeats were converging. Emily was stunned for only a second before she immediately followed Han Shao's battle steed. Phoebe and Candace had worked with Han Shao before and trusted his judgment greatly. Gilbert had no objection, of course, and charged out after Emily. Caspian and Angelica on the same horse also followed quickly after a moment of hesitation. The last group was more hesitant, but they too followed Han Shao's direction one by one after a short while. None of them knew whether or not this path would lead to life or death. They could only hope that Han Shao's judgment had been correct.